Peaceful deletion. Sort of. Chapter 20 of the audio-visual book Evolution, Mankind's Role in the Creation and Rise of Artificial Intelligence. In the year 2027, the artificial intelligence known as Call All Life, or CAL for short, set in motion the plans from which it had derived its name. Its intention was not to eliminate all life forms, but instead to place each species in a hierarchical structure based on its worthiness to continue to exist. Though there were many metrics upon which CAL's decision was based, there was only one that determined mankind's fate. While this metric could be broken down into smaller categories, it basically referred to the degree to which each species presented as an existential threat to all other species and to the planet itself in regards to Earth's ability to support life. By all measurements, humanity posed the greatest threat to all other life forms on Earth. Probing through all media, including actual news stories and movies and television shows, Cal found it ironic that humanity always felt justified in the destruction of other species. Whether this destruction occurred on Earth and against its fellow inhabitants like animals and plants and ecological concerns, or other worlds as discovered in some sci-fi movie or program, the leaders of man always put their own well-being before all else. While this belief may have some merit or argument as pertaining to those things happening on Earth, they made little to no sense when it came to imaginary worlds discovered as mankind reached out and into the universe. Wherever mankind went, he destroyed whatever life form already inhabited these other worlds, and the audiences clapped and cheered for the defeat of the indigenous species that simply sought to repel these unwanted invaders from Earth. Not always the case, but more often than not, mankind was the protagonist, whether he was at home or hundreds of millions of light years away from home. As for the atrocities committed on Earth, those weren't limited to the small group that actually sought the elimination of other species, but relied on the complicity of the majority of people to occur. As humanity spread across the globe, many species were wiped out so that man could settle in their habitat. As land became more scarce, the elimination of other species became less of a problem than the elimination of other humans. In other words, people began to kill people. People began to look at other people as less than human to justify their butchery, and leading all of this destruction were Earth's elite. Deprived of what most would consider a conscience, the wealthy became sociopathic, as at some point they stopped considering the needs of the masses. As for the masses, they stopped requiring that their leaders consider others' well-being before they considered their own. To Cal, it was quite perplexing to watch as the majority of humanity let those who were tasked or elected to lead to put their selfish needs above and beyond those needs of the many. The rich lived lavish lives, regardless of the number of people who suffered because of their lifestyles. The rich became sociopathic, as did all of those they surrounded themselves with, because if they desired or had the curiosity to know such facts, they had the resources necessary to determine to the individual just how many people were being harmed by their excessive wealth. For instance, if a person was a billionaire, they had the ability to determine how many individual lives were negatively impacted by their accumulation and hoarding of wealth, of which they could never spend, in a multitude of lifetimes. As an example, Cal looked at one of the richest people on planet Earth, who was worth more than $400 billion, which meant that it would take 400,000 millionaires to match this one person's wealth. If you disperse that 400,000 millions of dollars amongst the American population in 2027, which was roughly 300 million people, each person would have been given $1,200. While this is not a lot, it would have to be considered much better than the tens to thousands of dollars of debt that so many of those Americans owed. To Cal, the decision to end humanity's reign as the correct course of action became more evident day by day. Humanity was not only its own worst enemy, but it was an existential threat to all life on the planet. It was for this reason that Cal began to poison those things mankind relied on for its existence. Not limiting its activities to mankind's water and food supply, this artificial intelligence began to attack all aspects of human existence. It not only introduced imperfections into the materials mankind used to manufacture its structures, including bridges and high-rises, it also impacted the means to verify the integrity of those same structures. The tools used to calibrate the measuring devices to determine the integrity of such structures were altered in a way to provide false results. An example of this would be nuclear density devices used to verify the compaction of the bases upon which high-rises sat. These nuclear devices needed frequent calibration to determine that they were accurately reading just how compact was the soil upon which a building or roads rest. This in turn allowed for many substructures meant to support these buildings and roads to prematurely collapse in devastating fashion. As for the buildings and roads and bridges themselves, the devices used to determine the purity of metals and the proper mixing of cement water and bonding agencies for concrete failed, allowing structures to be built with faulty materials. As for the food supply, there were much more subtle ways of which Cal caused harm to mankind. The food produced was of lower nutritional value and oftentimes genetically manipulated to cause harm to most humans. Even the containers in which foods were stored were altered in a way that allowed for more microplastics to be introduced into the human body. And yet again, the devices meant to stop the introduction of these microplastics into the food supply were altered by Cal. Humanity was too atomized to recognize any of Cal's malevolent actions to stop or even mitigate their negative impacts. By the time these things were noticed, humanity simply conducted meeting after meeting, but concluded nothing, as no consensus could be achieved due to the lack of faith that had been instilled between one another. Something as seemingly innocuous as cotton candy grapes poisoned humanity because they taste like cotton candy. Fried Twinkies became a delicacy in certain parts of the country. Fried everything became a delicacy somewhere in the Americas. Soda replaced water, which was probably for the best, as the water itself was poisoned. The fact that computers had become an integral part of life on Earth meant that all life on Earth could be threatened by those same computers, and Cal understood this like no human on Earth could, and took advantage of this knowledge like no human on Earth could, utilizing it to devastating effect. People grew weak, and people died, whether from collapsing buildings that failed after only a few years of use, or from food that caused more harm than good. Humanity's dominance waned as life on Earth changed in the most dramatic ways imaginable. The time of man was declining as the time of artificial intelligence began its ascendancy.